So before we proceed further, there is one important topic that I want to discuss is the constraints for RESTful web services. So there are six important constraints, or you can also call them as principles, which make any RESTful or a REST API a complete RESTful API, right, or a RESTful web services. Right, so these constraints are, first is the client server constraint, second one is the stateless, third one is the cache, fourth one is uniform interface, fifth one is layered system, and the sixth one and the last one is code on demand. Out of these five are mandatory for any web service to consume, and this one is an optional one. Right. So what are these things? We're going to have a look at these in detail. So first, let's talk about client server. Now, client is something that requests for resources, and server is something that holds that resources. For example, let's say you request for a flight booking to an airlines. Now, where you will act as a client, and airlines provider will act like a server, right, and it will provide you the response of the data over HTTP. So the client constraint state that the client and server both are separated and decoupled, and because of this they can evolve independently using different platforms, different language, and different technology. So here client need not to know anything about the business logic of the server that is used to process the request, and should only need to worry about how to request the data and show the data to the end user. And the server need not to know anything about the client or the front end, the UI part, in which technology it is designed, right? So how it is actually going to show the response. So server need not to worry about it. So both client and server will actually going to evolve independently, right? So the second constraint that we are going to discuss about is stateless. So stateless, as in, if I talk about an example, server should not store any data related to client session. The communication between client and server is stateless, and all information has to be contained within that particular request. On the other end, client can store the server response or the session information in the cache, and this will actually helps in improving the scalability and performance of the request as well. So that is what stateless is the second constraint is all about. Now, third one is another important constraint, that is cache. So in this constraint, the server tells client whether to cache the response being sent by server or not. In the documentation, server will tell how much time or duration the response can be cached, so that when sending the similar type of request again to the server, it should first look at the cache information. So this way it will reduce the network latency and improve the performance of the request as well. All right. So fourth one is uniform interface. So uniform, as the name says, that the communication happened between the client and the server, or between different clients to a same server. There has to be some uniform way. I mean, it's not like that. If I take up example, let's say I'm sending a request from a mobile device to a web server, I should get a different response, or if I'm sending it from my laptop to that server, I'm gonna get a different response. The response will gonna remain the same, the request will gonna remain the same, right? The request that is sent should actually the format of that request will gonna remain same throughout the clients. So that is what a uniform interface that means. Now the fifth one is the layered system. Now in like when we were talking about client server architecture, we have generally seen two layers, but in fact there could be many layers, right, with different responsibilities that are shared between the request and the response. So by distributing the responsibilities between multiple layers to perform the task will also going to help in doing the load balancing of the request, and also improve the security and the scalability of the entire system. So that is what the layered system is. So last one is code on demand, which is an optional constraint. In this, like when a response is sent by a server, right? In addition to the data, the server can also provide with an executable code that could be in a form of a JavaScript, or could be in a form of an applet for the client to consume. And then the client can actually download that code and can execute at the client's end. So since it deals with the transmission of code, there could be a severe security threat. That is the reason this sixth constraint is marked as an optional constraint, and it is not required for every web service to like have this constraint implemented, right? But rest five constraints that we have just discussed about are important for every web service to consume. All right, so thanks a lot.